Chapter 4, Part I of Greener Than You Think. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Greener Than You Think by Ward Moore. Chapter 4, Part I. The first snows of this ominous winter halted progress of the grass. It went sluggish and then dormant, first in the far north, where only the quick growing season, once producing cabbages big as hogsheads, had allowed it to spread at a rate at all comparable to its progress farther south. But by now there could be no doubt left that Cynodon dactylon, once so sensitive to cold that it had covered itself, even in the indistinguishable Southern California winter, with a protective sheath, had become inured to frost and chill, hibernating throughout the severest cold and coming back vigorously in the spring. It now extended from Alaska to Hudson Bay, covering all Manitoba and parts of Ontario. It had taken to itself Minnesota, the northern peninsula of Michigan, Wisconsin, a great chunk of Illinois, and stood baffled on the western bank of the Mississippi from Cairo to its mouth. The northwestern, underpopulated half of Mexico was overrun, the grass moving but sluggishly into the estados bordering the Gulf Coast. I cannot say this delusive safety was enjoyed, for there was unbelievable hardship. In spite of the great bulk of the country's coal fields lying east of the grass, and the vast quantities of oil and natural gas from Texas, there was a fuel famine, due largely to the breakdown of the transportation system. People warmed themselves after a fashion by burning furniture and rubbish in improvised stoves. Of course, this put an additional strain on fire departments, themselves suffering from the same lack of new equipment, tires, and gasoline afflicting the general public, and great conflagrations swept through Akron, Buffalo, and Hartford. Garbage collection systems broke down, and no attempt was made to clear the streets of snow. Broken water mains, gas pipes, and sewers were followed by typhus and typhoid and smallpox, flux, cholera, and bubonic plague. The hundreds of thousands of deaths relieved only in small degree the overcrowding, for the epidemics displaced those refugees sheltered in the schoolhouses, long since closed, when these were made auxiliary to the inadequate hospitals. The strangely inappropriate flowering of culture, so profuse the year before, no longer bloomed. A few invincible enthusiasts, mufflered and raincoated, still bore the icy chill of the concert hall. A quorum of painters besieged the artists' supply stores for the precious remaining tubes of burnt umber and scarlet lake, while it was presumed that in traditionally unheated garrets, orthodox poets nourished their muse on pencil erasers. But all enthusiasm was individual property, the reaction of single persons with excess adrenaline. No common interests united doctor and stockbroker, steel worker and truck driver, laborer and laundryman, except common fear of the grass, briefly dormant, but ever in the background of all minds. The stream of novels, plays, and poems dried up. Publishers, amazed that what had been profitable the year before was no longer so, were finally convinced and stopped printing anything remotely literate. Even the newspapers limped along crippledly, their presses breaking down hourly, their circulation and coverage alike dubious. The streets were no more safe at night than in 16th century London. Even in the greatest cities the lighting was erratic, and in the smaller ones it had been abandoned entirely. Holdups by individuals had been practically given up, perhaps because of the uncertainty of any footpad getting away with his loot before being hijacked by another, but small, compact gangs made life and property unsafe at night. Tempers were extraordinarily short. A surprised housebreaker was likely to add battery, mayhem, and arson to his crimes, and altercations which commonly would have terminated in nothing more violent than lurid epithets now frequently ended in murder. Since too many of the homeless took advantage of the law to commit petty offenses and so secure some kind of shelter for themselves, All law enforcement below the level of capital crimes went by default. Prisoners were tried quickly, often in batches, rarely acquitted, and sentences of death were executed before nightfall so as to conserve both prison space and rations. In rural life, the descent was neither so fast nor so far. There was no gasoline to run cars or tractors, but carefully husbanded storage batteries still provided enough electricity to catch the news on the radio or allow the washing machine to do the week's laundry. To a great extent, the farmer gave up his dependence on manufactured goods, except when he could barter his surplus eggs or milk for them, and instead went back to the practices of his forefather, becoming for all intents and purposes practically self-sufficient. Soap from wood ashes and leftover kitchen grease might scratch his skin, and a jacket of rabbit or wolverine hide make him self-conscious, but he went neither cold nor hungry nor dirty, while his urban counterpart for the most part did. One contingency the country dweller prepared grimly against. Roaming hordes of the hungry from the towns, driven to plunder by starvation which they were too shiftless to alleviate by purchasing concentrates, for sale everywhere. Shotguns were loaded, corn cribs made tight, stock zealously guarded. But except rarely, the danger had been overestimated. The undernourished proletariat lacked the initiative to go out where the food came from. Generations had conditioned them to an instinctive belief that bread came from the bakery, meat from the butcher, butter from the grocer. Driven by desperation, they broke into scantily supplied food depots, but seldom ventured beyond the familiar pavements. Famine took its victims in the streets. The farmers continued to eat. I arrived in New York on the clipper from London in mid-January of this dreadful winter. I had boarded the plane at Croydon, only subconsciously aware of the drive from London through the traditionally neat hedgerows of the completely placid and law-abiding England around me, the pleasant officials, the helpful yet not servile porters. Long Island shocked me by contrast. It had come to its present condition by slow degrees, but to the returning traveler the collapse was so woefully abrupt it seemed to have happened overnight. Tension and hysteria made everyone volatile. The customs officials, careless of the position of those whom they dealt with, either inspected every cubic inch of luggage with boorish suspicion and resultant damage, or else waved the proffered handbags airily aside with false geniality. The highways, repeating a pattern I had cause to know so well, were nearly impassable with broken-down cars and other litter. The streets of Queens, cluttered with wreckage and refuge, were bounded by houses in a state of apathetic disrepair, whose filthy windows refused to look upon the scene before them. The great bridges over the East River were not being properly maintained, as an occasional snapped cable, hanging over the water like a drunken snake, showed. It was dangerous to cross them, but there was no other way. The ferry boats had long since broken down. At the door of my hotel, where I had long been accustomed to just the right degree of courteous attention, a screaming mob of men and boys wrapped in careless rags to keep out the cold, their unwashed skins showing where the coverings had slipped, begged abjectly for the privilege of carrying my bags. The carpet in the lobby was wrinkled and soiled, and in the great chandeliers half the bulbs were blackened. Though the building was served by its own power station, the elevators no longer ran, and the hot water was rationed, as in a fifth-rate French pension. The coverlet on the bed was far from fresh, the window was dusty, and there was but one towel in the bathroom. I was glad I had not brought my man along for him to sneer silently at an American luxury hotel. I picked up the telephone, but it was dead. I think nothing gave me the feeling that civilization as we knew it had ended so much as the blank silence coming from the dull black earpiece. This, even more than the automobile, had been the symbol of American life and activity, the essential means of communication which had promoted every business deal, every social function, every romance. It had been the first palliation of the sickbed and the last admission of the mourner. Without telephones, we were